Keir, like any historical event, most everyone remembers where they were or what they were doing when COVID really took hold. Maybe you were fighting someone for toilet paper, maybe you were packing up to go stay with family, or maybe you were just glued to the news watching it all unfold. Whatever the case may be, we all have memories associated with those early and really uncertain days. Now, having lived through COVID and having seen Contagion, I think it's safe to say, wherever Steven Soderbergh was, he was thinking, I told you so.
And it's a well-earned I told you so.
We're not the first people to comment on Contagion's prescience. The movie has taken on a new life since 2020. But fortunately, the movie's eerie ability to predict the future is by no means the only interesting thing about it.
We try to avoid the beaten path as much as possible here on the Filmographers podcast, the show where we study a director's entire career, one film at a time. I'm Keir Graff.
And I'm Michael Moreci. In our first season, we're turning the spotlight on Steven Soderbergh, one of Hollywood's most fascinating and versatile directors. We discuss why each of his films succeeded or failed, always looking at them in the context of the Hollywood landscape at the time they were released. Keir, we've got a really full episode ahead of us, so I say we jump right in with your one-sentence description of Contagion, and I challenge you not to say the word COVID.
COVID. Sorry, I just had to clear my throat. After Gwyneth Paltrow gets drunk, takes selfies, and breathes all over the patrons in a Hong Kong casino, then cheats on stay-at-home dad Matt Damon, she sets in motion a global pandemic that sets in motion a desperate race for the cure, showing us that the deadliness of a novel virus is only matched by the predictability of human nature.
Keir, I want to dive in with both feet and examine where Soderbergh is at professionally at the time of Contagion's release, because it's a really interesting and crucial time for him. In fact, I'd like to propose a thought to you. I'm going to argue, and we'll further this idea in our next episode on Haywire, that Contagion is the start of a new chapter in Soderbergh's career.
Okay, I'm intrigued. If you're right, though, I would argue that this is now his fourth chapter. This is rough, but I kind of think you could argue that chapter 2 began with Out of Sight, and chapter 3 began with, let's say, Ocean's 11, because that was kind of a period where he was alternating these blockbuster hits with these, much more experimental, independent style films.
Yeah, I would agree. But I didn't prepare for you saying something that's smart, so I'm going to ignore it.
Fair.
But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think we've talked about that quite a bit, that because he's so adaptable and such a chameleon that, you can argue lots of different points where you see something end, underneath Schizopolis is the end of that first chapter, then Out of Sight starts the next. And I think, Ocean's 11. So there are these points where, at the very least, he's pivoting and trying something else.
If we wanted to use thought leader kind of speak, we might call them inflection points.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Welcome to our TED Talk, everyone.
Yeah.
But so the purpose of let's say whatever number new start this is, it is a new start. And there are some things I want to point out with this one, starting with, and I think this is most important, Soderbergh's production company, Section 8, shut down in 2006. Clooney, who had formed Section 8 with Soderbergh, went off to start Smokehouse Pictures with Grant Heslov. Leatherheads, the movie to which Soderbergh was once attached to direct, was the company's first film. So that means, looking at the timeline, The Informant, which was released in 2009, 2 years prior to Contagion, was Section 8's final film. So Section 8 closed in 2006, but they still have some movies in the pipeline, basically. And then I think the start of, Leatherheads is around 2009 or 10. So there's some overlap going on with the timeline. And this is when people are announcing things and making things public. So who knows really when Section 8 officially ended and Smokehouse officially began.
Sure.
Right. But basically, that is the timeline as we know it. Section 8 ends in 2006. Informant, the last movie that Section 8 produced, was released in 2009. This also means that it was the last movie that Soderbergh and Clooney collaborate on, ending a really long time partnership. For those who don't know, Soderbergh and Clooney connected on 1998's Out of Sight, and they remained pretty much attached at the hip for the next decade. They, of course, did the Ocean's movies together. So that's 3 movies there. Solaris, they formed Section 8 together, like I said, and they produced through that channel a healthy slate of movies like Michael Clayton, which Clooney, of course, starred in. Soderbergh just served as a producer. Syriana, which Clooney also, these are all Clooney movies. Wait a second. They did other non-Clooney vehicles as well, Far From Heaven being one of them, which is, I would say, potentially the best non-Clooney movie that they did. Non-Clooney, non-Soderbergh movie.
Yeah.
And more.
Yeah, it was a bromance for the ages. And from what I can tell, the end of that bromance was amicable. Clooney seemed to want to be the main guy at his own company, which is reasonable enough. And Section 8 always seemed to be a little more Soderbergh's venture, with Clooney tagging along. Maybe that's just my perspective. And the two have tried to work together since. They were going to remake The Man from U.N.C.L.E. before that fell apart. You can hear more about that on our episode about the movies Soderbergh didn't make. And, Clooney was set to star in No Sudden Move, Soderbergh's 2021 movie, but had to drop out due to his son's health concerns.
Right. And at the same time that this is happening, that Section 8 is disbanding, Soderbergh said he wanted to focus more on directing, probably because he had only managed to direct 6 movies in 6 years when he was behind Section 8.
What a slowdown. 1 film a year? Slacker.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, pick up the pace, Steven. According to Variety, going to your point about the bromance's end being amicable, George Clooney had this to say, quote, "Steven and I were talking about it on the plane this morning, la-di-da, because we were about to wrap up." I'm sure they were flying coach.
Oh, yeah. Definitely not flying private.
Yeah, man, it would have been nice. We could have heard this whole conversation if you were just in row J behind them. Anyway, Steve and I were talking about it on the plane this morning because we're about to wrap up Ocean's 13. And I looked over and said, "So how do you think we did?" And he said, "I think we did pretty good." And I said, "I think we did pretty good too." End quote.
Sorry, I'm getting a tissue to wipe that tear out of the corner of my eye. Yeah, if only Stephen and George were staring at the Bellagio fountain when they said that instead of, in their fancy net jet.
There might have been a fountain in the jet.
Maybe a chocolate fountain.
But Soderbergh's producing relationship with Clooney isn't the only thing coming to an end at this time. Listeners may recall in our episode on Bubble, a movie that Keir and I really love and we implore people to watch. I'm assuming most of you haven't seen it. If you have, I'm sure you know what we're talking about, but we love it. We think it's one of Soderbergh's best, and we hope that you watch it. But in that episode on Bubble, we detailed how in 2005, Soderbergh signed a 6-picture deal with 2929 Entertainment, the production company started by billionaire entrepreneurs Mark Cuban and Todd Wagner. Well, Soderbergh wouldn't make 6 low-budget movies with 2929. He only made 3, the aforementioned Bubble, The Girlfriend Experience, and his second Spalding Gray documentary, And Everything Is Going Fine. All 3 movies did not well. Let's just say not well. It's not hard to see, why this partnership, this deal would end a little bit early.
Yeah, and for that reason, Mark Cuban was out.
Mark Cuban the whole thing was out. I think everyone was out. You're out. I think I'm out. What is it, the bottle rocket? He's like, you know what, you're out. And you know what, I think I'm out too. Everyone was out. That all said, it's a time of endings for our man Soderbergh, but also, I'd say, it's a time for new beginnings as well. Which brings us back to Contagion. Now, right off the bat, let's just look at the cast. Not only is it stellar, and this is just, talk about dynamite performances and a dynamite cast, but it's also, importantly, it's a new cast. Besides Soderbergh's experiments in low-budget filmmaking, movies, like we said, Bubble and The Girlfriend Experience, Soderbergh's cast since the early aughts was starting to get a little bit predictable. He had his regulars, and he used them often. Maybe maybe too often. Discounting those aforementioned low-budget affairs, George Clooney had starred in 5 of his past 8 movies. 3 of those 8 movies featured the Ocean's cast, so that's an entire large cast, coming back time and time again. And then if you cast the net a little wider, you have Julia Roberts in 4 movies, Benicio del Toro is around a lot, and so on and so forth. The point is that Soderbergh's troupe, it feels like from the outside looking in, was due for a shakeup, and that happened with Contagion. We've got Lawrence Fishburne, Kate Winslet, Jude Law, Bryan Cranston, and in my opinion, the MVP of the whole thing, Jennifer Ely.
Though he still has Matt Damon, but come on. I mean, you always keep Matt Damon.
I'm Matt Damon.
She's Matt Damon.
I'm sorry, but it's true. I'm Matt Damon.
She's Matt Damon.
I'm not imagining it's you.
Not only all of that, but the movie Contagion just feels different. I mean, sure, it has echoes of the multi-storyline, global scale approach of Traffic, but visually, those movies are really leagues apart. Contagion is far steadier for one thing. Like literally, there's little handheld used in this movie where Traffic had a bunch. And Soderbergh isn't, he's not playing with the color palette or shocking the film stock like he did in Traffic, which was, like we said, not only gave wonderful results, but was a huge risk because you can literally just like scorch the film stock and make it unusable. But I don't know. Contagion is, I hate to say it's a conventional movie because it's not, but it's certainly more of a, visually, when you're looking at it against Traffic, it's more of a studio flick, which is not bad at all. I don't mean that, I feel like that can be a loaded thing to say, but I mean that as a compliment. It just feels like a competent, well-made, you would even say Oscar baity, potentially studio movie.
Sure.
Look, it takes guts, in my opinion, to strip things down the way Soderbergh did, the way he always does, and place the focus elsewhere, particularly on the science driving the story. I mean, bear in mind, this movie came out before we all became junior CDC lab techs, and we were all off doing our own research, or some of us were. So the science could have been, and it wasn't, but it could have been, especially then, could have been overwhelming. And if you pair that with like the visuals of something like a Traffic, it could have really distracted from conveying what was vital information in that movie.
Yeah, and it's also just a tighter movie than Traffic, clocking in at an hour shorter. As a fan of both tripods and short movies, I am here for it. But we should also talk about the score because, man, is it great. Cliff Martinez is back, baby. He hasn't collaborated with Soderbergh since Solaris in 2002, and the last time he worked with Soderbergh before that was, you guessed it, Traffic.
Yeah, and it's crazy because this score is, again, comparing it to Traffic, same composer, so it's apt, but really different.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Martinez is going full Tangerine Dream, and I love it. In Haywire, which we'll discuss next week, he uses David Holmes again, and the score isn't bad, but it feels a little samey, a little like Ocean's 14. So great choice to use Martinez for Contagion.
Now that we've given some context to the movie, let's boil things down to the simplest question. Keir, did you enjoy Contagion?
I did. And even though I really don't want to revisit the pandemic in any way, what impresses me about this film is that every time I watch it, it just still gets to me. I mean, it is weird that Soderbergh doesn't use handheld here because it kind of cries out for his method of, objective quasi-documentary filmmaking. But although it is a little more Hollywood, as you pointed out, it just doesn't matter. Soderbergh makes so many good choices that make the virus real and make the characters' plights real and to keep the story humming along. He makes Gwyneth patient zero and kills her off in the first 10 minutes. I mean, it's a Hitchcock move, right? Put a big star in and take care of her right away.
Right. I thought you were going a different direction with that, like as a crowd pleaser to start off.
He gives the audience what they want.
Yeah. First, I like this movie. But I wonder, speaking of our, Gwyneth, we kid, but I do wonder if Goop sells any homeopathic antivirus remedies, and if so, where do you insert them?
Yeah, I'm gonna leave that one to the imagination of the listeners. But the way he uses the camera and cutting to show us the way the virus spreads just definitely takes me back to the days we were all, wiping our groceries down with bleach. I mean, watching this film, it's not hard to feel short of breath or to feel like you have cooties crawling up your arms. I mean, there are just so many sequences where, in the early in the movie, particularly when Gwyneth is sick and the camera tracks all the things that she has touched or shows us, a gambler next to her says, breathe on my dice for good luck or whatever. And knowing what we know, having been through a pandemic, I mean, those scenes are just chilling. But of course, he was making this film before we had COVID-19. I mean, the world has suffered pandemics before. I mean, there have been swine flu, H1N1, it's not like this stuff has never happened, but this was certainly the biggest one in all our lifetimes.
Yeah.
But I do think the best thing about the movie is his use of his ensemble cast. This movie has a terrible poster. It's one of those towering inferno things where it's like, look, see how many stars we have. And I know Soderbergh didn't like the poster. He said in an interview that they had some much more artistic ones, but they just, they didn't quite work or they weren't engaging enough. But, maybe a poster like that or a DVD cover like that is appropriate in a way, because a film about a pandemic isn't really about a virus. It's about people and about how people, how the virus spreads and how people spread it and how they respond to it and the social upheaval it causes. And because he kills off an A-lister at the beginning, you don't know who's safe and who's not, I mean, you got to keep Matt Damon safe. You'll need him for another movie, but Damon provides a great heart of the film as a grieving dad who will do anything to keep his daughter safe. The actress who plays his daughter is also great, a very convincing teen. Some of us lived through COVID with teens in the house, and she can't believe she's missing out on so much of her young life. I mean, boy, that really resonated truly. I think during COVID, we all felt like we were losing time, but kids especially, time is different for them. A summer feels like an eternity, whereas some of us are like, well, okay, I guess we're gonna lose a summer. It's a lot harder for them, and they really conveyed that in this film. Fishburne is excellent as a supportive mentor who still commits an ethical lapse. Jude Law is really entertaining as a sleazy blogger peddling fake cures while asking some reasonable and some very unreasonable questions of people in power. Winslet is very strong, but, very doomed. I could go on. He gets a lot out of a great cast. Some big talents who were also content to not, carry the movie.
Yeah.
It's well conceived, well written, well shot, well edited, perfectly paced. Mike, what did you think? Did you like it as much as I did?
Oh, yeah, I did. I mean, look, it's hard to discuss this movie without discussing COVID. It's inevitable now, but I'm going to try because on its merits and its merits alone, the movie it's excellent. It's just a great movie. And I liked it more and more every time I watched it. I don't know how many times I turned it on, but it just got better and better. And you start to see how he was pacing things out and tying things together. And it's so well done. Like you said, the details of, blowing on the dice and touching the bus door and like all these things that they're just calling subtle but nuanced attention to is really good. And there's a lot of it in, so much so that I don't, like the first time around, I didn't pick up on every single detail and every single narrative thread. It was just so good. And the urgency, the urgency it conveys as the virus spreads, it couldn't be more perfect. It moves quickly, it moves smartly, and it's not frantic though. It doesn't feel like people are running around the globe. And, Soderbergh said, I want to make this movie, but if I have the movie, the president cannot be in it. Which makes sense because you don't want to have like people running through the White House being like, get me the president. We got to, like you don't want that scene.
Yes.
And he avoided that scene. And I think it's so much better because of it.
Yeah. And almost every other filmmaker would have put that scene in.
Definitely. I mean, even the CDC, like you get Fishburne and you get Winslet, you get a few peripheral people around, and even
Cranston's guy,
yeah, which I think him and he was Homeland Security, I forget, but there was just like a few reps from the vital organization, and that's really all you got. But through how smart it was, and through how urgent and how steady it was, it manages still to deliver really complicated science and makes it digestible, and it has just enough with the characters to shrink this global story down to the human level. What you talked about with Matt Damon's heart and his daughter, and how well played she was and how well drawn out she was, and Lawrence Fishburne having his ethical lapse. John Hawkes in his small role did really great with his son. Like, you just see it, like, and it doesn't overwhelm you with it. It doesn't overwhelm you with the science. It just finds this really great balance. I love Soderbergh's direction. I think we both did. It's steady. It's confident. I mean, we can't praise these performances enough. They're terrific. And getting to what I've been trying to avoid, but getting to it, the film predicted the future, and the impact is so much greater now because of watching it now, because of it. It's kind of like the opposite of Traffic, where with that, and we talk about this in our episode, it's kind of quaint. You're like, oh, the war on drugs, but every drug's illegal now. So, or every drug's legal now. So, it kind of aged, to no fault of the movie, aged a little poorly because of that, while Contagion's power, on the other hand, has really grown.
Sure.
Now, I mean, we're all not thrilled about that, but nonetheless, it is what it is. And I hate that phrase. But speaking of Traffic, getting to that movie and things we talked about there, I do have a question for you, Keir, because these movies led me to some thoughts about writing in general. My agent said this to me best, and I'm sure you've heard this in some form as well, that if your character doesn't want anything, then you are screwed. Your story is screwed. And I think about this a lot because I do think it's vital. Characters have to want something physical, emotional, spiritual, something. It's the bedrock of character development, and the best stories know how to take this fundamental desire into unexpected places. Maybe the character shouldn't have wanted that thing all along. Maybe the object of the character's desire gets perverted along the way, and in these developments, the character learns new things and grows in unexpected directions. Now, there's countless examples of that. Hollywood, The Third Man, one of our favorite movies, one of Soderbergh's favorite movies, comes to Vienna seeking his friend, Harry Lime, only to learn he's an evil racketeer and has to adjust who he is and what he expected to happen because of that. Martin Pauly in The Searchers thinks he's going on a mission to rescue his sister from Native Americans, only to realize that his partner, Ethan, has other designs, and we can go on and on. But I was thinking about the character in terms of Contagion, and it's one of the things that on first viewing held me back a little bit. As I watched it more after that first time, I feel like I was a little wrong, but I still think it's a good discussion to have, because we like to have these discussions about craft and writing. So I'm wondering what your thought. Like, I feel like Traffic does give us a little bit more with his characters. Benicio del Toro, that scene where he brings water to his deceased partner's wife is, I think, maybe one of Soderbergh's best scenes that he's ever done. It's just so powerful and so perfect. Michael Douglas, when he transitions from politician to fighting the war on drugs to dad trying to save his daughter, is really pretty powerful, but something.
Yeah.
Contagion, I don't think reaches quite that level. I don't think it needs to. And I actually like Contagion quite a bit better. But that aside, my question is twofold. Do you agree? Is Traffic a little as a notch above Contagion? And what are your thoughts on this idea that characters have to want something in order for a story to work in an effective way?
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. Like, I do agree that, like, I think the characters' wants in Traffic are maybe more palpable and carry that movie a little more. Like you, I like Contagion more as a movie, which is interesting to think about. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. Like a bedrock principle of good storytelling requires a character to want something and to be frustrated when they try to get it. There are exceptions to every rule, and I mean, sometimes the wants are driven by external circumstances. Like some of the stories that will stay with me forever are stories of survival. I was going to say a closet reader, but not so much a closet reader. I'm an avowed fan of survival stories. Like I have, my most treasured shelf in my home library is about tales of survival, exploration. It's usually like explorers going out into the, unknown, in the olden days, wooden ships or something. And because of their misunderstanding about the way the world works, they find themselves, instead of like discovering some great new thing, they're just trying to stay alive and get back home. And I don't know why. I find those stories so utterly compelling. So some of the stories that stay with me and have really lingered with me are just stories, or like when the stories of survival, like when a character's life and desires are interrupted by an accident or circumstance that means the want to stay alive supersedes everything else. Like you think about the story we all had to read when we were in grade school, Jack London's To Build a Fire, or Gary Paulson's Hatchet, the Shackleton story, Piers Paul Reed's Alive, which is about as gripping of a true tale as you're likely to get. There's just no more older or more primal human desire than the desire to live and maybe beyond your own survival to protect your family. And then that gets to the core of what, Matt Damon is doing. I think that Matt Damon's character, it's interesting. Like, I said earlier that he's the heart of the film. And, it's because he knows that he's not at risk himself. So his desire is now to be the dad his daughter needs, and to not be her friend or pal or give her what she wants is just to ensure she has to live through the pandemic. And that's such a compelling story. As a parent, I find that compelling. I mean, that gets to a universal human thing that we're faced with, whether our kids are, in grade school or teens or whatever. It's just like having to be strong enough to not give them what they want, but what they need, right? We've all seen parents who always give their kids what they want, and that doesn't end well.
Right.
So I think that's one of the reasons he's such a great anchor for that film. I think there are other interesting kind of character wants as well. Jude Law's character claims to want the truth, but what he really wants is fame, and to kind of get back at the people who belittle him too. He's a really interesting, like, complicated stew of petty grievances.
Yeah. And I think there's, when I understand, sorry to interrupt you, there's a cut of the movie that is an hour longer. So he reaches traffic. Soderbergh has said, and a lot of it was cut out. And I can't say whether it's the right choice or not, because that cut, it's not like there's no deleted scenes on the 4K or DVD, Blu-ray, whatever. I don't think those have ever been public. I don't know what those scenes are exactly, but I think there's a lot more with Jude Law, if I'm not mistaken, which would be interesting because he is a really interesting character. I agree with you. So there is potentially even more out there in some form.
Fascinating. I mean, I think we get enough Jude Law in this, and I think he adds a lot. But again, looking at the way things really went, foregrounding a character like that might make a lot of sense in the way the pandemic's really played out and the aftermath of the pandemic that we did actually all experience. It's interesting. Like Fishburne's CDC director, or whatever his title is he's motivated by concern for others, both for Winslet, his employee, and his girlfriend, to whom he leaks sensitive information. But there are a lot of characters who are just kind of driven by duty and nobleness, and that could have potentially weakened the film, I would say, because that's the hardest thing I think in drama to convey is when somebody just wants to do the right thing, or to be a good guy, to do good, or to be self-sacrificing. The Jennifer Ely character you talked about, like the self-sacrifice of taking the risk to inject yourself with a vaccine that could kill you but could save millions. It's probably good that she's a supporting character, because foregrounding a character like her, I mean, that's when you start to veer into melodrama.
Yeah, and you got enough, because that's what really hit me pretty hard on one of the multiple viewings was her scene with her dad. I thought that was so good. Like, it was just like her being, they share this passion for science, and for learning and for medicine. And she conveys that story to him, like the story that he told about the the guy, I forget what it was, something about an advancement in bacteria and maybe not vaccination, but something to that degree. And she tells him, you taught me this. You gave me the spirit of curiosity and passion for science, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And she's exposing herself to him. He was sick.
Yeah.
And she tells him, like, I'm exposing myself to the disease. I have to do this, you know? And I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was wonderful. Like that scene really got me.
Does it say something about how cynical I've become or our society's become that I find like it's interesting, like the pure motivations are in some ways the hardest to believe.
Yeah.
But I do think that the movie did an excellent job. And as you so rightly point out, that they sell her character more. Selling is a bad word. They make her character more believable because of the relationship with the dad, for sure.
And there's actually, and I should point this out, because when I saw her inject herself, my reaction first was no way. Like no scientist would do this. And then one of the bonus features on the disc, there's interviews with, I don't know if they're CDC doctors and scientists, I forget, but they say, yeah, they would do it.
Yeah, and there are absolutely scientists who do that, and there are people who do pursue knowledge for knowledge's sake. I remember I got a kid's book for my kids about like scientists who experimented on themselves, because there were throughout history for hundreds of years, there have been scientists who, for them, the most effective way to prove something, or they were the most available experimentation subject they had. So there is a long history of that, and it doesn't always go well. So
right. Right.
In fact, it often has not gone well.
Right. But it did a lot with that, I feel like. And you're right. It is difficult to balance like the lack of a term, the bigness of some of the character arcs. Like they're, like you said, the survival, it's hard to do stuff with that, like just survive or just passion for science and passion for knowledge. Like those are hard things to dramatize at that really individual level, but it does it really well. And Soderbergh himself was sensitive to this balance of character, narrative, and science. And I would say no one can talk about it better than the man himself.
Here's what's interesting about the telling of the story. It is that you've got all these characters. And how do you have such a wide canvas to write on that you can make sure that it doesn't get lost in terms of such a big subject, so that you keep it personalized?
That's called sweating in the editing room.
Is that what that is?
Yeah, it really is.
It's where you make it happen.
Yeah, we had, I would say, close to an hour of edited material that's not in the film. This was I'd say I had more versions of this film that I presented to Scott and the producers than any I've made, over 20. Mm-hmm. So a lot of trial and error, trying to find that balance between character and narrative, trying to keep the movie moving as quickly as the virus, and having enough science to make you feel like it was real, but not so much that you just sort of fade away.
It doesn't sound like a textbook.
Yeah, exactly.
There's an elephant in the room, Mike, and it keeps coughing.
I know. And it's not like I wanted to avoid talking about Contagion and COVID. We have a little, because still it's obviously salient to our discussion. It's salient to this movie. But I don't know, over the past 2+ years, that discussion, not just the COVID discussion, but the COVID and Contagion discussion has been had, and it's been had a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. But still, it is very much a big part of our history. It's part of our present. I mean, I had COVID in July for the 3rd time. It's not gone.
Hat trick, baby.
Repeat.
But, and I think that's part of why I've been reluctant to dive into this part of the movie, because I'll be honest, like watching Contagion, even now, like we're a little bit, we are a good deal distant, at least from the heart, at least what we hope is the heart of the outbreak. It hit me, and it hit me hard. It took me back to how difficult and how frightening that time was back being 2020. Like, it was scary. It was uncertain, and I don't recall it that clearly, to be honest, which is I've read about and I've heard about. It's actually normal not to have a recall of this time because, look, I don't remember what exactly it was, but I read this thing that as a parent, you forget the first year to like 18 months of your kid's life. And that's actually true. I mean, I remember some stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if I remember. It's very much a void. I don't know if that's how it is for you. A blur, not a void.
Yeah. Wait, so my kid's life or COVID? Yeah.
Your kid's life. So the first year to 18 months as a parent is usually like you forget that.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Because my recall for that is super blurry. I mean, just exhausted and whatever. I have some distinct memories and some impressions, but it is very much a blur. COVID, I remember more clearly. Much of it kind of does run together. Some vivid memories really stick out for me, like, wiping down groceries with bleach, as I already mentioned, filling up a shopping cart at Target with supplies that some well-meaning numbnuts on Twitter insisted we'd all need because he was a doctor. I never used all that cough syrup, ibuprofen and Tylenol. I was still throwing that out, months ago.
That stuff I learned through the pandemic, that stuff expires.
Yeah, it does expire. Thanks a lot. I think that doctor was actually employed by Target or some Tylenol. He was working for Big T. Yeah. You better buy it all up now. God, I think more vividly even I remember, like people crossing the street to avoid walking next to each other. I remember going for a run in the very first week or two, and this elderly couple like yelled at me for running too close to them, and I was just like, man, I'm like gone. I'm past you in a second, and they were like really upset.
You're the one gulping my air, yelling.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. Keep your mouth closed. God, and one of my most vivid memories was like our wonderful mayor shut down the parks, which, of course we now know is like the best place for everybody to go. And I live across the street from one of the biggest parks in Chicago. And I would just sit out there and sit at my window and stare longingly at it until finally I was like, screw this. And I started going running in the park, and it felt like the end of the world, but it was still kind of beautiful. It was like wild and overgrown and empty and desolate. It was such a weird time.
Yeah, I had the same bike riding experience where I would ride through North Riverside, which is, for people who know, North Riverside was designed by the same people, I'm forgetting their names, who did Central Park and Prospect Park.
Edward Law Olmsted.
Yes, yeah. And it's designed, the street is lower and the grass and lawns are raised up. And the idea behind it is that you can't see, makes the street less visible.
Yeah.
But also means there's more green space. There's a lot of green space in it. And not North Riverside, but Riverside. And riding your bike through it and these parks and this green space, it's always like overgrown. It just looked like you said, the end of the world. And I have vivid memories of that.
Yeah. I remember feeling too, this like cognitive dissonance, because for much of the pandemic, it was, for me, I was very fortunate. My family was very fortunate. We didn't lose anybody, thankfully. And I remember, so here I was sitting at home. I was rewatching classic movies. I was watching the long ones that I never had time to watch. I watched, I Heard You Paint. What was the Scorsese one with De Niro and I Heard You Paint Houses, or whatever they call.
Oh, The Irishman.
The Irishman. Yeah. That was, the book was I Heard You Paint Houses. The book, and The Irishman was the title. Yeah. Watching, 3.5 hour movies, reading long books. But meanwhile, on the news, morgues are overflowing. They're putting corpses in trailers and stuff. And I remember this really set of complicated feelings. Our family was spending time together and doing okay. And yet it kind of felt like the world outside was falling apart.
Yeah. And I think there's a reason why that, for you or for me, like we remember those, I don't know, the less strenuous details, wherever you want to say. Like, I guess they would be considered that, but like and this word gets used so much, and I hate using it, but the trauma of it all, I think, is the stuff that gets forgotten. And that's bringing it around back to parenthood. That's actually the reason. So like when you're a parent, the experience is relentlessly traumatizing in a way. Like you're afraid, you are uncertain, You are not sleeping. Your social world has crumbled. And the way your brain copes, long term, so one, so you can recover, and two, so you can do it again.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Is to forget. Like that is like an actual, like from what I read, it was like an evolutionary instinct that has been built into us, that the way that we insulate our minds against this really, yes, it's a really wonderful and beautiful and exhilarating experience as well, but it's also a very scary, uncertain, and you don't sleep and all that stuff as well. So how do you bounce back and recover? And how do you go back and do it again? It's like you just forget. Your brain is wired to forget.
And that's why people don't keep current on their vaccinations.
Well, I was doing some research, Keir.
Oh, no. Mike's doing his own research.
But it's the same. I think you can apply that idea, though, to COVID. Not like that you want to do it again, but like you just recover by forgetting. Like, and I'm not trying to I'm not trying to be dramatic because, like you said, I came out okay, and thank God, my family came out okay, and people I know had it much worse than me, and I'm not trying in any way to diminish those experiences. COVID wasn't easy for me, it wasn't easy for you, it wasn't easy for any of us, and parts of Contagion, God, especially the end, like got to me. Like I started thinking about, like you mentioned, like all those kids, man, all those kids from like little kids who missed preschool and kindergarten. My son missed kindergarten, and like the social learning like is really still affecting him and his peers, kids who miss prom. And it sounds kind of I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess silly,
sappy, hokey,
but it's real.
Yeah,
like those things are real things. It's a real part of your life, and I started thinking about that stuff. Started thinking about how much more we could have lost had it not been for the doctors and nurses and scientists and essential workers, and even some politicians, not all, some. We were lucky, we had a good governor, but finding a vaccine and maintaining order and all that had to happen to like right the ship and get us back to where we are now. And like, it's kind of a miracle. It's kind of a miracle that we are here. It's not that long. I mean, it feels like, at least to me, it feels like that was a long time ago. It's not. And I don't know, the movie hit me, and it got me thinking about these things. And I guess in the end, it made me feel grateful, for all of what was saved and preserved. And it made me remember that I don't ever want to go back to that place again.
Yeah. Wow. That's. Yeah, the movie does definitely have an emotional impact. COVID was 4 years ago. As you say, it seems like a long time ago. 4 years ago. For many of us, there were 2 years without seeing family. 2 years of missing a lot of stuff. My kids missed key years of school as well. Freshman year of high school and senior year of high school. Those are rough times to miss through COVID. And I was the first one in my family to get the vaccine, probably because of my advanced age. But, that was such a moving experience. I remember going in line, 2 by 2, socially distanced to Northwestern Hospital, and kind of winding my way up this staircase and through these hallways into this great big room where all these socially distanced stations, nurses are administering vaccines as fast as they possibly can. And I got teary-eyed just thinking like, wow, science, and also just feeling this sense of like, wow, we made it finally, like that, they fixed it. It's all over. And, well, we know how that turned out.
Yeah, look, it helped a lot. We're still, dealing with it for sure. But no, not quite. It's not, I think people want to believe, like we've said, and not to get, we also don't want to get political, but like want to believe it's totally over when it does still exist. It does.
People still die from COVID.
People still die from COVID. Yes. Now, granted, getting back to the movie, Contagion wasn't totally prescient when it came to its actualization. The collapse of society, the garbage piling up, the post-apocalyptic looting. It seems a little silly. The lottery for the vaccine seems really silly, but damn, they got a lot of things right.
Man, I mean, I almost spit out my drink when I heard someone in the movie use the term social distancing. I forgot that existed before, but of course, people who are epidemiologists or whatever, like they were prepared and they're studying these things and they have their own professional language. It's just weird that we had to live in an era, where that became part of our nomenclature. The race to find a vaccine played out differently and maybe a little more slowly, but felt accurate in the larger sense. And of course, the thing that Soderbergh really nailed was the widespread proliferation of bogus cures and false information, as we're kind of tiptoeing around here. I mean, wow. And you could argue that had COVID been more deadly, like the virus in Contagion, I can't remember. I feel like they said it killed 1 in 4 people that.
I believe so. I forgot what the R naught number was.
Yeah.
But I think by the time, like their death toll was like over 20 million. And what's ours in real life is something like 7 to 8 million around there, I believe. So it was far deadlier.
I think in the movie at some point they say the R naught is now up to 4 or something. So one person who gets the virus in Contagion infects 4 people. Maybe I'm misremembering the numbers, but and that the mortality rate is like 25 to 30% or something, which is
high.
Crazy to think about it. So yeah, like it had the thing we experienced in real life been more deadly like that, maybe we would have seen more of the post-apocalyptic stuff, and due to the timing of the Black Lives Matter movement and, the riots in major cities, we did see, riots and looting at the time, which was, maybe somewhat related, but it wasn't directly. It just the timing made the summer of 2020 was a wild time. I mean, we're here in Chicago. Chicago raised the bridges to keep people from getting in and out of the loop.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived here my whole life. That's never happened. I've never experienced anything like that. I mean, there hasn't been an occasion because there hasn't been this, alchemy of a pandemic and a sweeping hot social movement. So of course I'm not saying it's should have happened before, but the combination and the fact that it did happen is pretty extreme. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. And it gave us maybe some, like removing the social aspect of it, maybe gives us a little bit of a taste of what things could have been like had the pandemic been more severe.
Yeah. And getting back to what you said, all the things that it did get right, like when they said social distancing, I couldn't believe it, but it makes sense. It's just like, stop spreading this is basically,
Yeah.
But in a way that makes this, also the real life experience, more frustrating because it's not just a prescient movie. Like, sure, you can look at it and say, wow, like Contagion got so many things right. Holy cow. But you can also look at it and say, wow, 9 years before the COVID outbreak, Contagion got so many things right. Why the fuck were we so behind? Scott C. Burns, he wrote Contagion. He also wrote the Informant, which we loved as well. So this marks his second collaboration with Soderbergh. He had this to say in an interview he did with the Washington Post in 2020. Quote, "It is sad and it is frustrating. Sad because so many people are dying and getting sick. Frustrating because people still don't seem to grasp the situation we are now in and how it could have been avoided by properly funding the science around all of this. It is also surreal to me that people from all over the world write to me asking how I knew it would involve a bat or how I knew the term social distancing. I didn't have a crystal ball. I had access to great expertise. So if people find the movie to be accurate, it should give them the confidence in the public health experts who are out there right now trying to guide us."
Or did you genuinely believe that this caught my fancy and this is something that could happen to us?
Well, this was an idea that was proposed by Scott Burns. Would you be interested in making a movie about a pandemic? And I said, yeah. So that conversation started in 2009, 8 or 9. So that's an example of the unpredictability of how things reach you. This was just a conversation we were having, and this subject came up and I said yes, and we started trying to develop it. But the idea that if there's anything predictive about the film, it's only because everybody we spoke to said, when the next one comes, it will probably go like this. They were all very consistent. So we were just listening to what we were being told. And we tried our best to at least explain how complex the challenge is to solve this problem, you know, and what kind of people are doing those jobs.
Yeah, it's just amazing when you think about, I mean, so often we accuse Hollywood of getting the science wrong, and they often do. And it's weird to be looking at, you know, a Hollywood film and saying, but they warned us. You know, I mean, we've seen big issue, big topic Hollywood films, you know, trying to make a case for something that we're not as on point. But that's just something that makes this movie all the more remarkable, because they researched it so carefully. They talked to so many smart people. They got so many details right that this really should have actually been a warning, particularly because so many people saw it.
Yeah, I mean, a quick aside, which makes me just think about the Hollywood movies. I mean, hell, we've talked about Traffic, but how about Aaron Brockovich? Now, granted, that's a true story that really happened, but the movie, which was, you know, seen by many, many, many people, opened eyes to like, oh my God, corporations are poisoning us, you know? And that became one of the narratives of the early aughts. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that didn't exist before, but we talked about that in our episode on Aaron Brockovich, that was like a big kind of eye-opening event that they got right. You know, granted, it was real prior, but it's still a very similar thing that, you know, Soderbergh's now done a few times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we shouldn't have to rely on Hollywood films to raise awareness for anything, but in an age of declining news consumption, I mean, it's great when an artist can take their social responsibility that seriously, along with entertaining audiences, and actually create something that, you know, reaches that many people. However, sadly, many people don't seem to heed that warning. You know, the information was definitely out there. I mean, you know, David Quammen wrote an important book in 2012 called Spillover: Animal Infections and the Next Human Pandemic. People were out there waving their hands and jumping up and down and saying, hey, people, pay attention to this. You know, I mean, again, we've had bird flu, you know, by this point. So people knew that the potential was there, that things could be much worse. Yeah.
I mean, one of the scariest lines in the movie to me was when, I forget his name, the actor's name, apologies, but like he's from Homeland Security, and he's talking to Lawrence Fishburne, because early in the film, there's a suspicion that this might have been a terrorist attack. And he says, you know, how likely would it be, or how possible would it be to weaponize the bird flu? And Lawrence Fishburne's character says, you don't have to. The birds are already doing it for us. You know, like, they're birds. Everywhere, you know? And it's like, oh man, I mean, that's just... And that ending of Contagion, I don't want to get too far off, but that hit me, like when you see the bat and he eats the banana, and because of our own, you know, fuckery in places we shouldn't be, you know, knocking down these trees and stuff, all of a sudden now this bat, and we're moving animal populations around, and the bat gets this banana and he's finding a new refuge in this swine, you know, farm, whatever it is, and here we go. Swine flu farm, and here we go.
Yeah, it's so great that the bulldozer that knocks over the tree has and disturbs and displaces the bats has the same logo. It's the company that Gwyneth Paltrow's character works for. You know, I kept thinking it was like the company was supposed to be like 3M or something, because they seem to be headquartered in Minneapolis, but whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just a big multinational corporation. We see Paltrow doing this kind of, you know, glitzy business trip, you know, some sort of ribbon cutting, but we don't even really know what her company does. But we keep seeing this logo, and there's this kind of implication that, like, this is a multinational. I mean, these companies exist. They do all sorts of things. They you know, knock over trees in some distant place to make a factory or a farm or something like that. And we don't know what the butterfly effect is ultimately going to be. However, in this case, the movie brilliantly shows the bat flapping away, roosting in the pig barn. Then we get to trace it all the way. Then the pigs go on a truck. The truck goes to this casino. The chef is butchering the pig. He wipes his hands on his apron and comes out, takes a picture. I don't know why Paltrow's character needed a selfie with the chef, but she takes the picture. They hold hands. They look at each other in this meaningful moment, and the movie brings it full circle so brilliantly. And you're just like, you know, we're still waiting for that moment. You know, was it the wet market in Wuhan, or was it the lab or whatever? But like, the movie gave us the satisfaction of that closure.
Yeah. And you also gave me some like nice a moment there, because I thought you had like echoes of like, bat goes into the pig goes into the market. Like it was like boat goes in the water goes, cage goes in the water, shark goes in the water.
I should have done it.
You did a very good Robert Shaw without even knowing. Anyway, so normally, pivoting away a little bit, normally this is where we talk about the movie's box office performance, but Contagion's a little more complicated than that. I guess it's less about the immediate performance and more about the overall legacy.
Though it did perform well enough at the box office. On a reported budget of $60 million, it grossed over $136 million. It brought in over $22 million its opening weekend, bumping off the previous top movie, The Help.
Can we get a clip right here of Bart Simpson shuddering?
Oh, The Help. Anyway, Contagion held on pretty well in the weeks to come, though it faced stiff competition against, get this, another movie Soderbergh was supposed to direct, Moneyball. Moneyball, by the way, went on to gross just $110 million, so Soderbergh wins. However, there might be an asterisk by this one, though, because the movie Soderbergh actually filmed after getting fired from Moneyball, Haywire, its release was delayed, didn't do nearly so well. We'll talk more about Haywire and Moneyball next week.
Yes, but we'll give it the Barry Bonds asterisk, and we'll speaking of baseball, but we'll say that ultimately, if you're putting these two against each other, that Contagion actually wins big time because it had an unexpectedly long shelf life, or more appropriately, it had a revival due to COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. People in a pandemic were just apparently wild about watching a movie about a pandemic, which is fascinating to me because during the pandemic, a lot of novelists started writing pandemic novels only to be told by their, agents and publishers, too soon. Nobody is ready to read your pandemic novel. And interestingly, there really haven't been that many published since then. They're starting to dribble out, but there's not been a ton of pandemic art since.
No, and there hasn't been. I mean, I think the most we've gotten is like lockdown art, lockdown movies, what we were doing, in the lockdown.
Right. Yeah.
It's been more of that than the pandemic, like something about the pandemic. But even then, there's not a ton of like your pandemic novel, which might have been lockdown novels as well, or lockdown stories in some medium. But I think people are like, nah.
Yeah. Too soon.
Too soon. But get this. Okay, this is where things get pretty interesting and pretty cool. For context, on Amazon, Ocean's 11, which I would say is probably Soderbergh's most popular, mainstream popular movie. That movie has just under 12,000 ratings to date, okay? So 12,000 ratings for Ocean's 11, most popular movie. Contagion, on the other hand, has over 59,000 ratings.
Wow.
Yes, crazy. I mean, look, that's not the ultimate metric, but that's a lot of ratings, man. Like, that's a lot, and not only that, okay, but during COVID's peak, Contagion was regularly at the top of the iTunes movie charts. It was the most watched movie on HBO, HBO Now or something. I don't know what it was called. Whatever it was called, it was the top.
Whatever they called it then, it was better than what it's called now, Max.
Oh, God. What's the CEO? The guy who looks like Skeletor. I forget his name. Zaslav. Anyway, according to Wikipedia, its piracy increased at a rate of, I don't even comprehend this, but at a rate of 5,609%, which seems absurd, but it's on the internet, so it must be true.
Yeah.
Suffice to say, Contagion's popularity became practically contagious.
Mike, you didn't.
I did. I had to. It's like, I'm a dad. Puns are absolutely irresistible to me.
Yeah. I mean, as a fellow dad, I can verify this is scientific truth.
You did your research.
Yeah, I did my research. Something happens to make us pun, and we have no control over it. But speaking of scientific truths, Contagion even spawned its own PSA. The cast got together, and by got together, I mean they shot separate videos while remaining in lockdown to record a special message about the science of the pandemic.
Hey, everybody. This is Matt Damon. So a few years ago, a bunch of us did this movie called Contagion, which we've noticed is creeping its way back up on the charts on iTunes for obvious reasons, given what we're all living through right now. And so the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University reached out to the cast and asked us if we would have a virtual reunion to do some PSAs for everybody that might be helpful. And so we readily agreed, and so here they are. So everything you're going to hear from us has been vetted by public health experts and scientists.
Since we're on the topic of PSAs, this feels like a good time to mention how vital reviews and ratings are.
They really are. We are an independent podcast. We're not in league with those fat cats over in Big Podcast.
We are not, and we rely on a little bit of signal boosting from listeners like you.
It's so easy. Whatever your podcast platform of choice, just take a few moments, no more than a minute or two, to give us a rating, and if you can, leave us a review.
It helps our metrics, which in turn makes us more visible and helps us reach a larger audience. So please leave us a rating or review, or tell your film-loving friends about us. We appreciate your help. We honestly, really do.
Yeah, and our goal isn't even 59,000 ratings. We'd be happy with 5,900 or 590 or 59.
Yeah, we can lop off some zeros.
So that's our PSA. It's not as sexy as Matt Damon and probably not as important as Trusting Scientists, but is still very important to us.
So that out of the way, let's get back to the show, and we're going to turn back the clock and go back to the time, shifting away from Contagion's legacy and prolonged success, and discuss its critical response when it was released. And the response was very strong. In fact, according to Rotten Tomatoes, Contagion is Soderbergh's freshest movie since, ironically, 2000's Traffic. Traffic sits at a 93% rating, while Contagion scored an 85%. The Informant isn't far, sitting at 80%. But we don't put all our trust and faith in tomato meters because that is ridiculous.
Yeah, that is ridiculous. And we wouldn't be doing our jobs if that's how far we penetrated into a film's reception, because not only was Contagion universally applauded, as Rotten Tomatoes shows, it was also, more importantly, deeply and thoughtfully appreciated. David Denby of The New Yorker called Contagion brilliant, while saying it was precise, frightening, and emotionally enveloping. Take that, Moreci.
Damn it. Like these guys, he said so many good things. You and Denby said so many good things about the characters, so I can't argue with either of you. I can't. But I can, and I also can't argue. I like to argue with Richard Roeper. I won't this time, but he said in the Chicago Sun-Times in his 5-star rating that Contagion is a brilliantly executed disease outbreak movie. Andrew O'Hare of Salon praised the movie's beautiful composition, particularly how they aligned with the narrative's efficiency. Good point. I like that. Mike LaSalle of the San Francisco Chronicle had this to say in his glowing review, quote, "Though modern in its style and gloss, Steven Soderbergh's Contagion has the welcome feeling of one of those epic disaster movies from the 1970s. And as you pointed out, and one of the posters.
The poster. They took the poster too.
Yeah.
The movie received one sparkling review after another. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone, Wesley Morris of Boston Globe, and Keith Phipps of the AV Club were all in the chorus of critics praising Contagion.
And they were joined, I like this a lot, they were joined by Karina Longworth. And anyone who knows movie podcasts surely knows her work on the fantastic You Must Remember This, one of the best movie podcasts around. I mean, take it from me, I have a mug. I have a You Must Remember This mug, so it must be good.
Very nice. Yeah. And that we try very hard to do a lot of research on the Filmographers, but wow. I mean, she is the standard of excellence for research in film podcasting. I mean, nobody's better.
Yeah. I mean, she's been, I would say, maybe we never vocally said it, but I think she's been a big inspiration for the standards of what we wanted to do here.
Absolutely. And last but not least, Contagion received a positive review from our good friend, Manela Dargis. She gave it 4 out of 5 in the New York Times. And I'm not even going to ruin the moment by reading a single word from her piece.
And we all walked away happier because of it.
Before we go, I've got one other small tidbit to share. Coming off The Informant, which Scott Z. Burns also wrote, his next project with Steven Soderbergh was going to be a biopic on the life of Leni Riefenstahl, which on one hand is pretty cool. Leni was a female director in the 1930s, which is a rare thing. On the other hand, for those of you who don't know, she directed Nazi propaganda films like Triumph of the Will and was friends with Hitler.
I read that and I was like, for real? Like, it was like, you know what? We should do this. It's an interesting subject for a movie. I mean, if you don't want anyone to see it, I'm like, yeah, I can't believe that was actually something that was like, we might do this.
I want to know so much more about that. Like, add that to the kind of list of amazing things that didn't happen, you know, like the Cleopatra musical. I hope someday we get to ask a little bit more about these. I'm sure he would have done a great job with it. It would have been interesting. But, you know, when I worked at Booklist magazine for 18 years, my boss, Bill Ott, said he was a great guy for empowering everybody who worked there. And he said he had one rule about magazine publishing, and that was don't put Hitler on the cover. Keep it simple.
Yeah, I think that's a really sensible rule.
Yeah.
And maybe Soderbergh heard that and said, you know what, this poster might have Hitler on it.
Yeah, we can't have that. Well, Soderbergh did come to his senses, realizing that a movie about Riefenstahl would probably struggle to find an audience. So when Burns instead suggested they make a movie about a pandemic instead of Nazi filmmakers, Soderbergh said, you know, that sounds like a lot more fun.
In comparison, that's probably true.
So Burns went off and started writing. He did extensive research and kept reaching the same frustrating conclusion, which he's been vocal about since the COVID outbreak. You know, in a nutshell, and this isn't a direct quote, but cobbled together from different interviews Burns gave, he said that, you know, we knew a pandemic of this scale wasn't an if, it was a when, but because science and medicine is so underfunded and undervalued, many leading experts were ignored, and as predicted, inevitability spread across the group. And despite our foreknowledge of this eventuality, we were still totally unprepared to deal with it.
Yeah, and some more fun tidbits to end on a lighter note. Maybe this isn't so light, but I'll start with the heaviest one that I just discovered in some research that I did last night. Soderbergh said, I don't know if you knew this, in 2020 he said, or maybe it was 2021 or 2022, something like that, that a spiritual sequel to Contagion was in the works. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder what that could be.
I don't know. There was nothing more than that. I couldn't find anything more than that. Like who knows, just a passing remark. But you know, he said it, so that's kind of cool. So the fun tidbits, like we said, John Hawkes was in the movie, and everything is better with John Hawkes in it. So that was nice.
Guy?
Yeah, I love that guy. And also, I hope we all caught Steven Soderbergh's minor role in the film, playing the voice of the guy Gwyneth Paltrow was having an affair with.
Oh man, I love that. I imagine many casual viewers and fans of Soderbergh don't know what his voice sounds like. Totally reasonable that you wouldn't know what a film director's voice sounds like, but obviously we spent a lot of time listening to him, and his voice is very distinctive to us. When I heard him on the phone, I cracked up, actually. But
well, it's funny because when you go to Chicago and there is a guy, I think his name's John Neal, that they wheel out of the house, you know, and his wife's like crying and stuff like that. Yeah. And it's not Soderbergh.
Yeah, right. He doesn't really want to be in the film like his face, but he's a good appreciation for a subtle cameo. It's his Alfred Hitchcock moment. Listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe on the platform of your choice and help us spread the word. Tell your film-loving friends about us, share our episodes on social media, and be sure to give us a good rating or a review. Those ratings truly make a big difference.
And if you really want to show your support and help us keep doing more deep dives into directors' filmographies, find us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/thefilmographerspodcast. Every dollar makes it easier for us to produce this show and share our passion for movies with you. Thank you. Thank you in advance.
And as always, thank you to Kevin Lau, our producer, Gompson, who composed and played our theme music, and Cosmo Graff, who designed our logo.
Join us next week on the Filmographers podcast, where we will discuss another Soderbergh first.
A single camera sitcom at last?
Not quite. Let's just say things go a little haywire, because that's the title of the movie, Haywire. We're doing Haywire next week. I ruined it. I think I spoiled it.
No, you did great.